We need to bring this on the table and address this with the Canadian government about the justice system, that it's not working and it's only one-sided, and that has to also change.
During the investigation, Colten Boushie's uncle lodged a complaint with the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission, and that file is still open. But the review announced today is separate. It's meant to determine whether RCMP members conducted a reasonable investigation into the death of Mr. Boushie and whether their conduct amounted to discrimination on the basis of race or perceived race. This just 1 week before the Crown's deadline to appeal that not guilty verdict. But that's not all. CBC News asked independent homicide investigators to review the work done by the RCMP, and they told David Common there were significant errors.
Homicide cases are built at the crime scene, an environment rich with evidence, potential keys to understanding what happened. But do something wrong, and the case may be compromised. When you look at some of the photos from the scene, what are the things that you would have done if you'd arrived at something like this?
Well, first of all, your main concern is preserving the evidence, preserving the scene. So
we asked veteran investigator Michael Davis to review the evidence outlined at the trial following the RCMP investigation into Colten Boushie's death.
There should have been a tarp placed over top of this vehicle, protecting it from the elements.
He's referring to this photo, taken just hours after the shooting. It shows a blood-soaked vehicle, but the RCMP left the SUV exposed for a day, door wide open, and the vehicle was drenched in a rainstorm. By the time forensics teams arrived, the blood was washed away. Is that acceptable?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. For a blood spatter expert to come and look at something like this, what would be the point? It's been contaminated, the blood pattern, everything has been washed away.
If this amount of blood evidence is lost on these areas, what's been lost on the other significant areas, the headrest, the door frame, you know, the seat back, the steering wheel.
Joe Slemko is a blood spatter expert with 25 years experience. He says relying on photos alone is not enough, especially these photos.
I haven't seen one photograph taken upwards of the roofliner, and especially dealing with a gunshot wound to the head, that could be the most significant photograph in the entire series.
But the RCMP expert had only these photos to rely on. She was not sent to the scene.
Negligent. It's unacceptable. Cases like this really frustrate me because our job as investigators is to seek out the truth. And I mean, this is just not acceptable in doing a proper job in trying to determine what happened.
Once police arrived on scene, Gerald Stanley was arrested, taken to the detachment, and photographed, only to be released for the night and asked to return the next day to give his statement. What are you losing or risking by waiting 18 hours to take a statement?
You're waiting for the suspect to get together with other people and concoct a story.
Yeah. We don't know that's what happened in this case, but there is
that, and that's the reason why you want to nail that statement down at that time.
There is also no indication that police asked Gerald Stanley to hand over his clothes, something investigators say should be standard practice.
We're dealing with potentially micro blood spatter stains that are less than a millimeter that may not be visible to the eye, that would have to go to a lab for analysis under proper lighting techniques. So, you know, if he said that, well, we didn't see anything on his clothing, again, that's where a trained expert should be saying, no, we need to seize that clothing.
That clothing may have been especially important in this case. Key to Gerald Stanley's defense was his claim the gun fired accidentally at extremely close range. So where did the gunshot residue land? It was on his hands and face, but not on Boushie's clothes. Surprising, say experts, given the purported proximity. At close range, it's often on both shooter and victim. As for the vehicle Boushie was in, it was never tested.
Do you think this investigation was managed well?
No. It's sloppy work, and obviously the RCMP needs a lot more training.
It was very clear that this was going to be an important case for Canadian jurisprudence and potentially for race relations in this country.
Chris Murphy represents the Boushie family, an experienced defender across a dozen murder trials. He's been critical from the beginning.
Well, my honestly held belief is that the RCMP in Saskatchewan either does not know how to properly conduct a murder investigation, or that in this case they made the decision not to dedicate sufficient resources to it.
And David joins us now. David, this is quite a critique. Any sense of the implications of this?
Well, it's impossible to know whether this would have changed the outcome at trial. That is exactly what the family of Colten Boushie has been wondering, and wondering what role race may have played in this investigation. We actually met with Colten Boushie's mother and told her that outsiders had found failings in the RCMP's investigation.
That tells me the RCMP did a bulged-up job. They looked, but then they looked away. I'm scared for the future. I'm scared for my grandchildren. That if the law could look the other way, there is no future. Nothing. We got nothing.
We did ask the RCMP about what they did and didn't do in this investigation, and they said they couldn't comment while an appeal period is still pending. But these are many of the same questions they will likely be asked by that independent watchdog.
Well, let's talk about that body for a moment. It's a civilian watchdog. So what sort of powers does it actually have to do anything?
Like, does it have any teeth? Ultimately, the powers are limited. They can make recommendations and findings, and they report that to government. And if the RCMP doesn't follow all of those findings and recommendations, then they have to defend themselves to government about why they aren't.
Okay, David, thank you. An important story.